Ladies and gentlemen, we are officially 1 week away from the best and the spookiest holiday of the year, Halloween, and with this in mind, not only is it the perfect time to talk about this new Cradle of Filth album, but it's also the perfect time to tell you all about the Halloween party that I'm hosting here, live on the Metal Meltdown on Sunday, October 31st. From approximately 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, till very likely late into the night, Dark Moon Desires, Chompy, and myself will be playing video games, drinking, telling stories, singing songs, and getting up to all kinds of stupid nonsense and buffoonery. And I want you to be there. I love you. It's not a party without you, buddy. You have to be there. So once again, live Metal Meltdown Halloween party on Halloween. Duh. Be there or be fucking square. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about Existence is Futile from Cradle of Filth. Regardless of how you actually feel about Cradle of Filth as a band and the quality of their music, there's really no arguing that they have perhaps one of the most unique and iconic styles in all of extreme music. Their sound, their image, their entire presentation is so lavish and theatrical and flamboyantly over the top. They're like the edgier, hornier version of Dimmu Borgir, or perhaps a more black metal-centric take on the stylish shock rock metal of King Diamond. Over the years, sonically, they've pulled influence and inspiration out of first wave black metal, second wave black metal, melodic death metal, thrash metal, black and death metal, opera and classical music and symphonic metal and gothic rock and gothic metal. Lyrically and conceptually, their albums have pulled influence as well from Victorian literature, from classic gothic, horror, and romance literature and media, from authors such as H.P. Lovecraft and John Milton, and filmmakers and composers like John Carpenter and Philip Glass. Now granted, this inherently very over-the-top smorgasbordian style can prove to be overwhelming at times to the point of appearing somewhat silly, but nonetheless, it's hard not to admire just how unique Cradle of Filth is as a band, and for that reason alone, I was actually pretty interested to check out Existence is Futile, as it's honestly been a while since I've really paid a lot of attention to Cradle of Filth or to any Danny Filth project. The first thing that really strikes me about Existence is Futile in comparison to other Cradle of Filth albums is how much more urgent and hellish and apocalyptic it is. Whereas previous albums have sounded like a coven of vampires taking part in some kind of supernatural bisexual orgy, this album is a lot more bleak, a lot more crude. It's devoid of hope and light and color. It is inspired by overpopulation, by the dystopian chaos that has defined the past 2 years of existence, with Danny himself going as far as to explicitly say, this album is about existential terror, the threat of everything, the end of the world, the end of one's life, existential dread. Note to self, never attend a vampiric, supernatural, bisexual orgy with Danny, because apparently he's kind of a fucking buzzkill. Holy fucking shit, dude. It's worth noting, too, that Danny's buzzkillery is not especially subtle, as the album opens on an orchestral piece that is pretty bold and epic, but also entitled The Fate of the World on Our Shoulders, after which the album officially kickstarts with Existential Terror, a very bleak and ghoulish display of melodic black and death metal with some thrashy grooves and some very sinister vocals. Some of the transitions in this cut are a bit clumsy in my opinion, and there are some weird vocal mishaps that we will address in greater detail later on in this review, but for the most part, it's a pretty solid start to the album. Thankfully, from here on, things do get gradually a lot more consistent and cohesive, delivering all the thrills that I think one would expect from a classic Cradle of Filth record, even despite the more apocalyptic nature. Tracks like Necromantic Fantasy and Black Smoke Curling from the Lips of War are packed to the brim with operatic vocals and very serene soundscapes, bombastic string arrangements, some ferocious thrash metal and black metal rhythm guitars, some sneering, venomous vocals, some organ sections. In between these two cuts, you have Crawling King Chaos, which may stand as one of my favorite cuts on the record, if we're being honest. It is just a deliciously evil and scorching piece of blackened death metal. There's some really nasty, razor-sharp rhythm guitar throughout the chorus that just gets my fucking blood pumping. And the orchestral and symphonic stuff here is so chaotic, but not to the point of being distracting or overwhelming. I do think that as the album goes on, it does begin to lose a little bit of its initial luster and urgency and appeal, mostly just because the songwriting, while still pretty unique by the standards of metal, is somewhat derivative by the standards of Cradle of Filth. I mean, there aren't really a lot of major twists and turns to speak of, and so much of this does still occasionally come off as some legitimately pretty sappy and mopey hot topic black metal melodrama. The general vibe of How Many Tears to Nurture a Rose being a fantastic example of this. Even so, there are still some pretty strong cuts on the latter half of this record, like Sisters of the Mist, Unleash the Hellion, and yeah, even the aforementioned How Many Tears to Nurture a Rose, which, honest to God, at times has the energy and the drive of like a classic Iron Maiden cut, albeit here applied to like gothic metal and melodic black metal. I will argue, though, that the album is perhaps a touch bulky and fatty, too much so for its own good. I mean, we got 14 tracks here, clocking in at nearly 70 minutes, and in my opinion, you could either remove 1 to 2 minutes off of every track, or cut 3 tracks entirely, and immediately you'd have something a little bit easier to digest and swallow. The bigger issue for me, though, is Danny's actual performance on this album. He does sound pretty menacing on some cuts, no arguing otherwise, but other times, some of his little vocal tricks and tactics are a little obnoxious, a little grating, and just a little bit awkward. Like, a lot of those high shrieks and screams can be legitimately kind of annoying even on a low volume. There's a particularly weird kind of vocal belch, for lack of a better term, around the 5-minute and 40-second mark of Existential Terror that completely pulled me out of the fucking moment. It, honest to God, sounds like a teenager trying to do like a black metal shriek or howl, but just failing fucking miserably. Warts and all, I had a much better time with this album than I honestly thought I would. I mean, it's not a perfect record. There are some issues with the Cradle of Filth style that still, in my opinion, need to be worked on and retooled, but all things considered, I would give this a weirdly enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. Yes, it's a little bloated, yes, it's a little silly, and yes, it's definitely kind of pretentious at times, but despite all of that, it's never not really entertaining. It's never not engrossing and immersive, and never not genuinely pretty fun. It honestly kind of makes me want to revisit some older Cradle of Filth records, and to check out the other records that I guess I missed along the way. I doubt that longtime fans would be disappointed with this album. Newcomers I could picture perhaps being a touch alienated and confused, but that said, I do think this would make a very interesting and informative gateway to extreme metal, and specifically to all the different corners and spectrums of the black metal universe. I don't know, what more do you need to know? I feel like I'm running out of things to say, so let's wrap it up. 3.5 out of 5. A weirdly kind of enthusiastic one. I was not expecting to enjoy this album. I did. So fucking give it a shot, I guess. You know, do with that information whatever you like. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately in case you somehow aren't already. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.